Sir Jaime Lannister and Sir Criston Cole, two knights who walk the line. Heroes to some, unworthy of the title Sir to others. But which one deserves the fecal matter paired with their name, and which one have the history books maybe done a little dirty? Well, let's pit them against each other and find out in our second entry of Who's Worse. What should we make them fight over, Tom? Wait, I've got it. Who's the worst member of the Kingsguard? Perfect. As usual, that age-old important question, books or shows? Whenever we do any kind of versus fight, we always try to go with what's fairest to both sides, which for Hot D characters usually meant the show was the way to go, as it built the characters out way more than the books did, providing depth. And it seemed like an accurate enough depiction with only really minor and inconsequential character changes. But then Season 2 happened, so books I guess, right? But going books for Cole is tricky, because his reputation as a character is far more polarizing than Daemon's is as a warrior, where there seemed to be a general consensus among all the accounts that Daemon wasn't someone to fuck around and find out with. Because of the nature of Fire and Blood's framing, basically biased, some might even say propaganda-fueled accounts from agenda-driven sources, with Monkin, Eustace and Mushroom unable to make their mind up about what sort of man Cole was, and then the recent Condor controversies regarding the big detours from the source material we saw in Season 2, basically making the show a far less reliable representation than initially thought, we're kind of in a bind here. So here's what we're going to do. We'll try and factor in both, but if the show put its foot down on something only speculated on in the books, that's what we're going with. I'm sorry to those Criston stans who think the show has done him dirty, you're not alone. For Jaime, come on guys, you know we're going books. We love Nikolai, but this is the inverse of Criston. Even though the book series isn't finished and the show is, Jaime as a character and all his Kingsguardy stuff is fleshed out in a far superior manner in the text than it is in the show. Minor Fire and Blood spoilers from here on out, and just so you all know as well guys, this is a judgment on their entire tenures in the Order, not one specific point in time. So yes, this is Jaime as a Kingsguard with and without the hand, and Criston under both Viserys and Aegon. Anyway, let's crack on, Tom. Starting things off with their warrior skills. A Kingsguard's core duty is to protect the king if attacked, and so of course their fighting skills are incredibly relevant. Both Jaime and Criston in their respective primes can be considered top of the top tier threats in combat. Jaime in his prime is in contention for the most talented swordsman of all time, let alone just his era, and Criston Cole is at the top of the food chain in his era specifically, only really challenged by Daemon Targaryen and maybe Cregan Stack, you know, if you believe the words of the Dragon Knight. At one point in time, both of these guys were easily formidable enough to fend off any lone would-be assassin and handle potential threats to a king's life better than most. But then one of these guys lost a hand. Now, before tearing Jaime down, I do want to acknowledge that while he loses much of his formal skill with swordsmanship, the ordeal did force him to adapt in other areas and he became more wise and tactical, which, fair's fair, is quite valuable in many bodyguarding scenarios. But we can't ignore that once he became ambidextrously challenged, he lost much of his raw potency as a warrior. After some extensive training with Ilyn Payne, he brought himself back up to about average to maybe slightly above average standards if we're being kind, but even he himself acknowledges his instincts are off and he is not as deadly as he once was. If you threw these guys against each other in their primes, my dragons would probably be on Jaime edging Cole out. But unfortunately, Jaime has a known peak and falls off quite hard after. Whereas Criston was a bright white knight who could fight at full might. Hey, that rhyme, Tom, don't you ever fucking do that in one of your videos again!
Stay off my turf!
Put it this way, if I'm a king and one of these has to defend me through my entire life, I want the guy who is consistently a killing machine to put between myself and would-be assassins, political rivals, and filthy, disgusting peasants who claim I'm not feeding them enough. So ungrateful. For that reason, Jaime, you're the worst of the two when it comes to warrior skills. Remember guys, this is who's the worst, so winning these rounds, not a good thing. The next attribute these two are trying to avoid the bottom podium on is political skills. While it's supposed to be a sacred order of knighted bodyguards, the Brotherhood is also sort of a political branch, especially the Lord Commander who often sits on the small council. Political skills are important here. You don't have to be a Grand Master like Varys or Littlefinger, but you do need to understand the game and be willing to play it a little. Now, if there's one thing Jaime hates more than hypocrisy, it's fucking politics. He outright despises any problem he can't solve with his sword. He's not without tact, but he is rather blunt and straightforward when it comes to problem solving, and while he's witty, it's the type of wit that's best employed if you really want to wind someone up. Not negotiate your way through a political crisis or out of a dicey situation, which Jaime had to learn the hard way.
Nothing to say. I liked you better before. I don't remember chopping your balls off too.
As such, he's not really networked or forged any political ties or favour beyond what's granted to his station. And what he does have, I'm sorry to say, is almost exclusively a result of his father and sister. Though that should not be undervalued because, as Cersei would say,
power is power.
Criston, on the other hand, is the polar opposite. You can't be common bone, my lord, and work your way up to Lord Commander of the Kingsguard and Hand of the King without playing the game and playing it well. We see this in the show too. Though he may get in over his head at times, especially as Hand, Criston also ebbs and flows, cutting ties when they are a liability and making friends when he needs allies. Criston always seems to find his way into the good books of the right people. Pure luck? Maybe, but every time he's rolled those dice, he's landed on a ladder. A snake recognizes another snake, methinks. To prove the point in the most clear-cut way, I would simply ask you this. Could you see Jaime rising to Lord Commander of the Kingsguard were it not for his house name, status, and connections? Probably not, right? Whereas you don't even need to make that a hypothetical with Sir Criston because he's actually done it. Sir Jaime Lannister, you are the worst when it comes to political skills and playing the game. 7 hells, Tom, your favourite character is floundering here! Can he pull it back with knightly honour? Neither one of these two is a shiny, clean example of chivalry, which is why we're playing who's worse instead of who's better. But which one drops the ball harder? Criston has a couple of instances of knightly behaviour, but honestly, it's all coming from the books and one is a hard maybe. It's suggested he did in fact reject Rhaenyra the first time she made a move out of knightly principle. And during the Butcher's Ball, he did try to save the lives of his men and offered to fight for them. Fair's fair, dues where they're due, that's kind of knightly. Bear in mind though, you've got to weigh that against murdering Lord Beesbury in cold blood, shacking up with the king's daughter, getting pissy when rejected and so moving on to his former king's wife after his death, and Cole was also willing to utilise underhanded tactics to combat the Black Zone, by sending Aryek on an assassination mission against Rhaenyra.
We will pay the princess back in her own bloody coin.
Dignified defender of the innocent, he most certainly is not. Yep, I don't know what you're smirking at, Kingslayer. You've got a pretty shitty rap sheet too, buddy. Look, I know you don't kill your cousin in the books, but still, you broke your vow by killing your king, sleeping with your sister, pushing a boy out of the window. Look, I know you did it to try and save us from his boring as shit chapters, and that's understandable, but still, attempted murder of a child is still attempted murder of a child, and to add salt to the wounds, you mocked Kat while she was grieving. Not very noble of you. And remember when you wanted to, reunite with Cersei next to your own son's corpse? Oh, what's that?
The population of King's Landing.
Oh, okay, fair enough. I suppose you did save 500,000 people when you killed that nutter. And I suppose you're technically faithful to Cersei, still gross though. And yeah, you did indeed save Brienne multiple times at great risk to yourself. I guess I've got to hand it to you. Haha, get it, Kingslayer! And I suppose we can give you points for upholding your oath to find Kat's girls, alongside not taking up arms against the Starks and the Tullys when you broke the siege of River Run peacefully. Okay, fair's fair. Jaime has done some pretty significant honourable and knightly things, if a little unorthodox. I think you know where I'm going with this, guys. Lord Commander Dunk would give both these fuckers a right good clout round the ear for how unknightly they both are, but he'd probably be a little softer with Jaime, since Jaime has some powerful instances of protecting the innocent, which I think we can all agree is the most admirable knightly vow. Sir Criston Cole, you are the worst when it comes to knightly honour.
I've soiled my white cloak. It is the only thing I have to my fucking name.
Next, let's take a look at their loyalty to their brothers. You serve alongside these guys. Of course they need to know you'd have their back, and vice versa. Loyalty might be a strong word when concerning these two though, Tom. I think I'd just settle for some basic respect and human decency. Jaime has a complicated relationship with the brothers he serves with. He deeply respected and admired some, like Arthur Dayne, Barristan Selmy, Gerald Hightower, basically all of the Mad King's roster. He had a healthy respect for Sandor Clegane, and in the books, he actually becomes something of a big brother figure to a young Loras Tyrell, whom the ambidextrously impeded Lord Commander saw himself in. Aw, isn't that sweet? He, however, had nothing but contempt, bordering on outright hatred for others, like Meryn Trant, Boros Blunt, Osmond Kettleblack, basically any goon who had gotten in through political connections, and he had a deep mistrust of Sir Mandon Moore. Though, in fairness, that mistrust was proven to be very well-founded. Hey, Tyrion. We don't get to see much of Criston's interactions with his fellow Kingsguard, but we do get just enough in the show to know he treats them like shit. Of course, this was exemplified in its apex with his coercing poor Aryek and forcing him on a suicide mission that would sully the Portwin's own knightly honour, and almost certainly get him killed, even if he did manage to assassinate Rhaenyra. When deciding this one, I posed this question. Why does Jaime hate some of his brothers? The answer? Because they fucking deserve it. Jaime only hates the brothers that beat children, try to kill his biological brother, and sleep with his woman. Even though, ew. And are all over just poor excuses for knights, let alone Kingsguards. However, Jaime greatly respects and holds loyalty to all of his brothers who have, in one way or another, earned it. When you run Criston through the same question, the answer is not nearly as flattering to the Knight of the Simp. Criston hates his brothers, because he simultaneously feels himself above them because he holds the King and Alicent's personal favour, yet can't handle his own personal shame over his own broken vows, and is thus spiralling because of it. Give Jaime a good roster of knights, and he'll be good to them. Do the same for Sir Criston. He's still going to treat them like a bunch of expendable nobodies. I know who I'd want to be back-to-back with in a big, epic last stand. Sir Criston, you are the worst when it comes to loyalty to your brothers. So far, it's neck and neck, but that's all about to change as we address perhaps the most important category of them all, loyalty to and ability to protect the king. Sir Criston, step forward. Sir Criston doesn't get off to the best start. I mean, he does sleep with his first king's daughter and then later his wife, though let's be fair, that one was after Vizzy's death. But once he makes his choice to play for Team Green, he's pretty ride or die and does everything in his power to protect Aegon and serve his team's interests. You know, despite Aegon being a pretty crappy and ineffective king. A lot of the Green's early wins on the board can in fact be owed to the combined efforts of the Kingmaker and Aemond. And during the Battle of Rook's Rest, Criston does demonstrate concern for Aegon, potentially even stopping an assassination attempt from his own brother. But even under the Greens, he does have a serious black mark. Under his watch, the King's heir Jaehaerys was murdered whilst Criston was warming the former Queen's bed. The book version does differ in regards to Criston's involvement with Blood and Cheese, but it still happens under his reign as Lord Commander, and when you look at the situation, oof, it could have been much worse had Blood and Cheese wanted it to be. That will be all, Sir Criston. You may return to your post. Jaime!
You're fucked.
Oh, man, you were doing so well! But time for a nosedive. Oh, where to start? Killed his first king, cucked the second while also being absent to defend him due to breaking the Kingsguard neutrality and fucking off to lead Daddy's armies. He then failed to protect the third, though in the books he technically wasn't at the wedding to prevent it, but that's not really an excuse because he ditched his duty to go fishing. Whilst we did want to keep to the books for the Kingslayer, Show Jaime is even more comical, as he manages a fucking hat-trick by losing Joffrey, Tommen and Marcella, whilst having his authority undermined and his position weakened by what is essentially a militant cult. Jaime! You know your primary job is protecting your king and his family, right? We've not even factored in that Elia, Rhaenys and Aegon all died under his watch whilst he was too busy polishing the Iron Throne with his arse. Simply put, if I was king, I'd be better off wearing a papier-mâché set of armor than having Jaime protect me. Sir Jaime Lannister, you are the worst. Not just in this matchup, but perhaps of all fucking time when it regards loyalty to and protecting your king. Conclusion time. Of these two, who is the worst Lord Commander of the Kingsguard? You know what this comes down to, Tom? One of these guys is a better Lord Commander and Kingsguard, but the other one is a better knight. Neither one can be considered a paragon of the role, but when it comes to being a Kingsguard and a Lord Commander, Criston understands the assignment and the reality of the post far more than Jaime. He was more willing to play the Game of Thrones, and despite a rather ugly and resentful personality, was able to make bedfellows of the right people. He was willing to compromise his honor and knightly principles to serve his king's interests and solve the king's problems. Above all else, he understands his primary duty is to protect his king and keep him alive, which he does everything that can be reasonably expected of him to do, especially in a realm where there's fucking fire-breathing lizards flying everywhere, to ensure this. Jaime, on the other hand, more hand jokes, Tom. He hates politics, he hates playing the game, and he is insufferable as a person, even though we'll love watching him quip and wind everyone around him up. Not to mention, we can make all the excuses for him till the cows come home, but like it or not, he has failed not once, not twice, but 3 times to keep his king alive. Aerys went by his own hand so he could save the innocents of King's Landing. He broke the neutrality of the Kingsguard by avenging the capture and, quote-unquote, motivating the freeing of his brother in the Riverlands, which prohibited him from possibly saving Robert, and he wasn't in King's Landing to save Joffrey because of that same little scrap. Not to mention, he delayed any chance of his returning in time further by going back to save Brienne from those bastard Boltons and that fucking bear. But this is exactly the stuff that makes him a better knight. Jaime flat out refuses to compromise his own personal code of pragmatic honor. Sometimes we can get behind it, sometimes we facepalm at him. But what's important here is that he will fuck off his Kingsguard oaths in an instant to do what he feels is the right thing to do. Which you can argue, like Dunk, Sandor and Brienne of Tarth, is the mark of a true knight. But a Kingsguard needs to follow the king's commands, and Well, look, be honest, guys. If you're a king and you're asked to choose between these two to protect you, you're going to pick the guy who wants your favor no matter how inept a king you are, not the one who will put his sword in your back if you give him a good enough reason. I mean, one's called Kingslayer and the other one's called Kingmaker, Tom. The signs were there. Sir Jaime Lannister, you are the worst Kingsguard. But take heart in knowing your worthiness is measured far beyond the confines of your white cloak. And that's our take. Who do you guys think was the worst Kingsguard? Let's open the floor up to all of them, not just these two.